We have chapter 41. We're rounding up economics A level lessons today. So we have measures to promote economic growth and development. And to promote economic growth and development, we can simply do these either with interventionist strategies or free market strategies. So I'm going to read further anyway. We said different types of development strategy. Economists and politicians have different opinions about the most effective development strategies for any individual country or group of countries. Some economists tend to recommend market-oriented strategies, which rely upon free markets to deliver economic development. Other economists tend to advocate interventionist strategies, where government plays a leading role, regulating and manipulating markets or bypassing markets through direct provision of goods and services. There are other strategies discussed later on in the chapter that might be used to promote growth and development. So the lesson is about measures to promote growth and development. To promote growth and development, we need different opinions. We need different strategies. And the most recognized strategies are interventionist strategies and the market-oriented strategies. And when we talk about the market-oriented strategies, we are simply talking about the free market. So it simply means the development and growth of that economy is mostly relying on individuals and private firms to come out with solutions on how the economy will develop and grow. And for interventionist strategies, it's simply talking about government trying to manipulate, government trying to come out with policies, government taking the leading role to ensure that the economy is growing and it's developing. So that's the difference between the market-oriented strategies and the interventionist strategies. So we're going to start with market-oriented strategies to promote growth and development. As we already know what market-oriented is about, it's all about shifting ideas, shifting responsibility from government to the hands of the free market, which simply means the reliance is all about resource allocation determined by the free market. So what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce to will be decided with the free market. So the first strategy that can be used when it comes to market-oriented strategy is trade liberalization. I want to talk about trade liberalization. We're simply talking about free trade. We're trying to talk about how trade becomes, easy, interaction becomes easier for everyone within the economy and as a whole. So trade liberalization is the removal or reduction of trade barriers between countries. One objective of trade liberalization might be to gain from export-led growth. An increase in export will increase aggregate demand, causing actual growth. Removing trade barriers will also force domestic industries either to close or to become as efficient as any world producer. This increase in efficiency will promote supply-side growth. Specialization and trade mean resources will be reallocated to those industries that produce goods in which the country has a competitive advantage in production. So there's a potential for all countries to gain. So the first measure or method that can be used or strategy that can be used when it comes to market-oriented is trade liberalization. And for trade liberalization, it simply means they're taking off barriers or they are reducing barriers that hinder trade between countries. And if that barrier is taken away, it makes individual countries to have opportunity to trade with any other country. And what would that bring? It will bring about export-led growth. So those countries that have competitive advantage producing certain products will have the opportunity to produce and sell to whoever they want to sell to, cut across the world. And that is what trade liberalization is talking about. Reducing barriers, taking away barriers that hinder trade relationship between countries. And if trade barriers are taken away, even domestic firms would have to, exporting firms would have to be up and doing, because if they are not efficient enough, other countries that are efficient would, steal the show. So trade liberalization would bring about efficiency, and efficiency might lead to export-led growth, which might as well promote economic growth and development, especially for those countries that have comparative advantage when it comes to certain production.
Okay.
I think trade liberalization is clear there.
Yeah.
And they said, going further, they said trade liberalization may help developing countries have access to technology. Removing trade barriers means developing countries can import more capital goods from abroad. This will help domestic firms in developing countries to increase their efficiency. In developing countries, Combining this with their lower wage costs means firms in developing countries will gain competitive advantage over developed economies in some industries. For example, over the past 50 years, developing countries have destroyed most of the textile industries in developed countries. They have done this partly by buying textile machinery from developed countries such as Germany and Italy. However, there's no guarantee that all countries will gain from trade liberalization. If any economy loses its comparative advantage in a sector, there will be a significant short-term cost for the economy because resources are not completely mobile between users. For example, when the textile industry was destroyed in developed countries, this would have caused structural unemployment, so actual growth would have fallen. Now, we're still talking about, we've talked about developing economies. Now, let's look at how trade liberalization would help developing economies. For developing economies, we know their reliance is always on the primary sector of the economy. But with trade liberalization, it simply means importation becomes cheaper for developing countries. And as a result of that, they might be able to, import equipment, machinery that would allow them to convert raw materials into finished goods. And if this is done, it gives them a competitive advantage over developed economies. How do they have that competitive advantage? They have those competitive advantage because the raw materials used, for example, a textile, the raw material used is produced or is already in the developing economies. And now they're having equipment to convert these raw materials into finished goods. So it simply means they have both the primary sector and the secondary sector in their care. And that gives them a competitive advantage. So developed countries would not need, they won't need to sell or export to developing countries their raw materials before they can make revenue. And that gives them a competitive advantage. And that's why they said the textile industry got destroyed. It got destroyed not because the market is not ideal. It got destroyed because the developing economy starts controlling both the primary and secondary sector. And if you can control both the primary and secondary sector, you have the tertiary sector with you. Because if you can convert raw materials into finished goods, it simply means you can as well sell the finished goods to whichever customers you want to sell to, instead of relying on developing or relying on developed countries to produce to convert the raw materials into finished goods and for them to sell or for you even to buy from them. So that is what trade liberalization is going to do. However, yes, we said trade liberalization would would increase both importation, makes both importation and exportation to be easier. But
There's no guarantee.
there's no guarantee. And why is there no guarantee? There's no guarantee because it depends on how much more the economy is and the kind of governance each economy has. Do you understand? And how accessible are the raw materials needed? So they made example of developed countries. For developed countries, yes, the textile industry might be destroyed. But does that really mean that they're going to be if it's destroyed, trade liberalization was the reason why it's being destroyed. And as a result of that, they're going to have what we call structural unemployment. Do you understand? So the point about trade liberalization is that it has the pros and it has the cons. So it's always going to be an opportunity cost anyway. I think trade liberalization is clear.
Yeah.
So one of the ways in which an economy, economic growth and development can improve is through one of the ways is the free market strategies, which is trade liberalization. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think that's the only one I want to do. Okay, the second method to use is promotion of foreign direct investment, FDI. Are you there?
Yeah.
Promotion of foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment can help remove some of the constraints on economic growth and development. For example, inflows of FDI add to the resources which can be given over to investment, helping to close any saving gap or foreign currency gap. FDI is the largest source of external finance for many developing countries. There's often a transfer of knowledge that adds a country's stock of human and physical capital, as discussed. So I'm quickly going to explain this. Another way to increase or another measure of promoting economic growth and development is through the promotion of foreign direct investment. And for foreign direct investment, we're simply talking about inward investment within the economy. And for inward investment, how does it really work? Foreign direct investment setting up in the country simply means the economy would generate more revenue. The economy would increase its output, and increasing an output within the economy would as well improve development of the economy. And FDI is also a source of finance for many developing countries because how is it a source of finance? It's a source of finance because foreign direct investment through multinationals will make profit. And as soon as they make profit, they have to pay corporation tax to government, which is a source of finance for government. Also, the transfer of knowledge. Multinationals will not come with all their workforce into the host country. So it simply means they will still need the help of the workforce of the host country. And for them to be able to use the workforce of the old host country, it simply means they have to train them. And that is where transfer of knowledge comes in. So the domestic workforce would gain knowledge, expertise, know-how from multinationals. And that also help in developing the human capital of the host country. I think FDI is clear there. Okay. There's are stories. I don't developing country. Let me see if there's any cons here. Okay, let me just read anyway. So the Global Investment Competitiveness Report of 2017 and 2018 said FDI is good for development. In 2016, more than 40% of the global 1.75 trillion FDI flows were to developing countries. So the report stressed the productivity gains for these countries. So the research concluded that a business-friendly regulatory environment and political stability were the two factors influencing multinational companies' investment decision in developing countries. Other factors include good infrastructure, access to land, and low tax rates. So to promote FDI, a developing country will have to find ways to offer some of these advantages. However, some measures used to attract FDI might cause other problems, which is the disadvantages. Like a country, for example, for a country in using low tax rate as a strategy to encourage FDI inflows. By the 1990s, it was obvious that FDI flows could be of significant benefit to developing countries. The challenge became how to attract FDI flow while at the same time ensuring they created economic development in developing countries. Now, it's all about attracting FDI. So to attract FDI, multinationals or transnational companies, they only want to come to a country that they feel is beneficial for them to set up. So how does it become beneficial for them? It becomes beneficial if especially developing countries, where is its kind of attraction, are able to to reduce their tax rates, come up with regulations that are friendly, improve on infrastructure. So these are things that becomes at the side of attraction for multinationals to set up. But if a country have to rely on especially low tax rates to be their side of attraction for multinationals to set up in the country, it might not allow that government to really achieve its macroeconomic objective. And that is the point they're making there. I think it's clear. But all in all, foreign direct investment is important, and because they would come with advanced technology, they will come with a lot of sophisticated equipment, they will come with technical know-how, which would as well be transferred in terms of knowledge to the host country. So that is about FDI. So one way to encourage economic growth and economic development is by encouraging or trying to bring to pull in foreign direct investment. And to pull in foreign direct investment, countries must try to put certain advantages onto them that would makes it an incentive for them to come in. So that was the second point. The third one is removal of government subsidies. Are you there?
Yeah.
The governments of many developing countries provide a wide range of subsidies. Many of these subsidies target essential items such as food or fuel. They make up a disproportionate share of spending of low-income households. Other subsidies target agriculture and industry in a bid to increase output and investment. Subsidizing essential items can be an effective way of minimizing absolute poverty. It can ensure that prices are low enough for poor households to buy sufficient food and fuel to stay alive. They are an easily understood and politically popular method of government intervention. However, there are a number of problems with subsidies. As a result, the removal of government subsidies is often regarded as a strategy for promoting development. So the reasons for this include: one, subsidies are poorly targeted if everyone in the population can buy the subsidized goods. If everyone can buy subsidized rice, rice, for example, which households benefit even though they do not need the subsidies. So here, when you look at removal of subsidy, the first question that comes to you is, when government removes subsidy, how can removal of subsidy become a way for economic growth and economic development? So one reason why the removal of subsidy becomes a way for economic growth and economic development is what they just talked about here. So when you remove subsidy on essential items like this, like rice, it simply means those who have the ability to buy and those who don't have the ability to buy will have the same opportunity to buy. And which simply means it is regressive, because at the end of it all, households that are rich might even buy more than, we spend less. They have the ability to even buy more than those households that don't have.
Okay, how does that lead to development?
It does not. How does that? Removing it, when you remove subsidy, it simply means it becomes expensive. So households would feel like, oh, we need more money to buy. So we need to work hard. And working hard means you're increasing your productivity.
So it's an incentive to work.
To work, yes, you get it. But with subsidies, it becomes cheaper for everyone. So even the poor households, we don't need to stress before they buy. But removal of subsidy becomes an incentive to, because things are expensive and rice is a staple food. We need to eat it. And so what do? We need to work hard to be able to buy it. Do you understand? So removal of subsidy here, because it's poorly targeted, it will not lead to economic growth and development. But we can't get to development without economic growth. Do you understand? So if people are working hard, it means productivity is expected to rise. Maybe because they are working hard, they might have more income. And as a result of that, they may be able to, to improve in the quality of life they have. So that's one of the reasons why subsidy is expected to be removed. 2, economic theory suggests that welfare would probably be higher if poor households were given cash payments. The payment could be targeted, avoiding the problem of everyone being able to buy subsidized goods. Welfare probably be higher if poor households were given cash payments. So if there's a cash payment, it simply means everyone will have the cash. So nobody's going to say he's rich, except if it is targeted. And targeting households that are poor needs statistics, needs data, and data is consumed. It's going to take time, and because it's going to take time, it's going to take money. Do you understand the second point there? The third one, where subsidies are given to farmers or industry, government is saying that it is better at allocating scarce resources than free markets. This may not be the case. If farmers are given subsidies or certain industries are given subsidies, that means you are spending on things that are possible. Why can't you divert that fund onto scarce resources? So that is the point there. So subsidy here is just like an opportunity cost. If government continues to subsidize, it simply means government might not be able to spend on strategic area of the economy that would bring about economic growth and development. Because farming would only increase economic growth. It might not as well lead to economic development. So removing subsidies on farm or certain industries might as well be able to be spent on maybe infrastructure or capital goods, which would lead to economic growth and development. You get the fourth point there.
Yeah.
Subsidies can easily become a significant proportion of total government spending. There's then a large opportunity cost in development terms. The money used for subsidies is not available to spend on education, healthcare, or building infrastructure. For an economy to develop, we need education, we need healthcare, we need infrastructure. Subsidies would reduce spending on education, spending on infrastructure, spending on healthcare. And subsidies are more likely to be primary income because nothing was worked for, which simply means there's no production on that amount because it's social welfare. Do you understand? So instead of government to continue to spend or to subsidize, government should invest on education, healthcare, and infrastructure because all these would attract foreign direct investment. All these would improve the know-how of people, the skills of people, and they may become more employable. So instead of government to spend on food, government should start diverting those funds towards education, those funds towards healthcare, those funds towards building infrastructure. Because healthcare, education, and infrastructure are a quicker way, though it's are the best way to develop an economy. Is it clear?
Mhm.
And the last point here, subsidies can be a major source of corruption and criminality. Government officials might divert the fund. It's subsidies for the vulnerable people. So they might even as well cut it. So that's about subsidy. And that's all about removal of government subsidies. So removal of government subsidy would either bring about economic growth and development than. So when government remove, so it's just this way. If government is removing subsidy, it means government is thinking long term than short term. Government giving subsidy means government spending on consumer goods. But if government is taking away subsidy, it simply means government is spending on education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This is long term, and that is capital investment. And capital investment would increase growth and development in the nearest future. I think removal of government subsidy is clear.
Yes.
The third one. Oh, there are problems. Sorry, I didn't finish that. Do I? Okay. Wait. Yeah, I didn't finish that. Now, however, okay. However, there are numbers of problems with subsidies as a result, the removal of government subsidies shift the supply curve from So okay, excuse me. Sorry. Yes, pause this. So for the consequence of subsidy, the consequence is that if subsidy is removed, prices are expected to rise.
Okay.
And if prices are increasing, demand for goods and services would fall. And if demand for goods and services falls, revenue for firms will as well fall. That is the consequence about removing subsidy. The removal of subsidy will shift the supply curve leftward. It will contract demand and increase the price level. I think it's clear. Is it clear? So the next free market strategies that can be used is privatization. And when we talk about privatization simply means the transfer of state-owned property into the hands of the private sector. So I'm going to read further to explain. In the 1960s and 1970s, many developing countries were influenced by socialist and Marxist theories of development. These theories advocated interventionist policies that include state ownership of many key industries. However, privatization is recommended by free market economists. They argue that the discipline of the market forces firms to cut their average cost to a minimum, leading to a productive efficiency. They also have to be allocatively efficient, giving customers what they want to buy. In contrast, nationalized industries have no incentive to be efficient. So privatization in developing countries can be a powerful way to increase efficiency and therefore economic growth. So the talk about privatization, can I have your phone, sorry, please? Okay. 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 The talk about privatization as a way of increasing economic growth and economic development is based on the free market economist ideology. Before now, like they said during the 1960s and 70s, it's about socialism and Marxism, which is all about state ownership of
Goods.
goods and services. But the case against socialism is that the free market, according to the free market economists, they said the public sector the public sectors do not have the incentive to be efficient. But because of increasing competitiveness in the free market, it forces firms to be more efficient. And being efficient simply means firms in a free market are both productive and allocative efficient. Why are they productive efficient? They are productive efficient because they are forced to find a way to reduce their cost. Because they know if they cannot reduce their cost, they won't be able to be competitive in the market. If other firms are reducing their cost in relative to theirs, then it simply means they'll be losing their customers. So the competitiveness, the fierce competition when it comes to free market makes the private sector to be more, productive efficient. That is how to cut cost anyway. Then when you talk about allocative efficiency, the free market is more, or the private sector is more allocative efficient because they want to only produce goods and services that consumers would buy. So they don't just produce, they are market oriented. So it simply means they do research before producing the product. If you really want to sell your product, you have to produce goods or services that consumers are willing to buy. And that is why they are allocative efficient. Government does not care about who buys or who don't buy. If government figure out that certain goods or services are needed within the economy, they provide it. But the free market would not do that. The private sector would not do that. The private sector will go through market research to understand, to anticipate, to know the needs, to know the gaps within the market, and produce goods and services to make profit in the market. And to make profit, you need to find a way to reduce your cost. And that forces them to be more efficient in terms of productive efficiency. And for the fact that they're going to produce goods based on research, it means they have to produce goods and services that customers would want. And that makes them to be allocative efficient. So the argument against nationalization that brings about encouraging privatization is efficiency, both productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. I think the point is clear there. However, when nationalized industries are privatized as monopolies, there are no competition pressures. Hence, the privatized monopoly can be as inefficient as it was in the state hands. Privatization in developing countries can easily be associated with corruption. An easy way for politicians or government officials to get rich is to sell a nationalized company at well below its market value to a family member or friend. Equally, large bribes can change hands at the time of privatization. So the problem about privatization is that it might become a monopoly. Changing hands, you're just changing those hands for the book. The objective is still to make customers vulnerable. So sometimes the affairs of the private sector, if not monitored by government, would lead to market failure. And that is the argument against the Marxist and the socialist argument towards not supporting privatization. Privatization is ideal because it brings about productive and allocative efficiency, also dynamic efficiency. But the problem about privatization is that it puts customers into vulnerability because they are market-oriented, they are profit-oriented. They don't care about the welfare. They only care about how to maximize their own profit. And profit maximization might come at the detriment of customers. So that's the argument against privatization. I think privatization is clear. But for an economy to grow or develop, privatization is one of the strategies of the market orientation that can be used. I think it's clear. So that's privatization. Thank you. Then we have the floating exchange rate. I have two videos already now. Right? So we have the floating exchange rate. Most governments have a choice about which type of exchange rate system to use for their currency. The few that do not are countries that are part of the monetary union, such as the Eurozone. Some countries use a floating exchange rate system. Market forces determine the value of the currency. The advantage of this is that governments do not have to intervene and not have to worry about their gold and foreign currency reserve running out. Another advantage is that depreciation, when it occurs in a floating exchange rate, is likely to cause export-led growth. So we have the floating exchange rate. Sorry, I need to make a video about it, so please. So the fourth measure or method to use when it comes to the free market strategy to increase economic growth and economic development, like I said earlier, is through the floating exchange rate. The exchange rate system, we have the fixed exchange rate system and the floating exchange rate system. But when it comes to floating, if the reliance is on the floating exchange rate system, it simply means the country is switching towards the free market. So the first advantage about the floating exchange rate system is that the exchange rate is determined by the demand for and supply, which is the market forces of demand and supply. And it is beneficial to the government of the country because the government of the country does not need to get involved. And it simply means it does not have to care about, the government of the country does not have to worry about its foreign exchange reserve or its gold reserve because it's not going to be part of what happens in the market. So that's the first advantage of using floating exchange rate system. And the second advantage is that if the free market decides to depreciate the floating exchange rate system. It simply means the value of the currency would fall. And as a result of that, it might lead to what we call export-led growth. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So if the floating exchange rate, if a country is using a floating exchange rate system, it simply means the market forces for demand and supply determines the exchange rate in that country. And if the exchange rate of that country is decided by the market forces of demand and supply, it simply means goods that comes in and out of that country will be determined by the free markets. And the advantage, like I said earlier, is that it means government spending would fall. Government would not have to spend to use its gold reserve or foreign reserve to manipulate the economy. But what are the problems using a floating exchange rate system? There are two main disadvantages of such regimes. One is that the value of the currency is likely to be volatile. Volatility makes it difficult for exporters and importers to make decisions about the future. The other disadvantage is that it can lead to swings in the macroeconomic variables, such as economic growth, inflation, and unemployment. Large rises in exchange rate, for example, can lead to lower exports and higher imports. This reduces GDP and is likely to increase unemployment. On the other hand, inflation would fall. Not controlling the value of the currency means that a country is very vulnerable to exchange rate swings. So the two problems, if a country results into floating exchange rate system, is that one, it will bring about volatility, which simply means it becomes difficult to predict what happens on the market. So the exchange rate market will be subject to fluctuation. And being subject to fluctuation simply means they decide it's going to be based on speculation. And being based on speculation means values can rise or fall at any point in time, which does not allow those within that market to be able to make decisions about the future. Do you understand? And because you cannot make decisions about the future, it won't bring a balance when it comes to exportation and importation. And when there's no balance between exportation and importation, it will lead to inflation, it will lead to unemployment, and it might even reduce the GDP of a country. So, and all these, if they happen, they are all market failure. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that's why a country would prefer to go with a fixed exchange rate than relying on the floating exchange rate. I think exchange rate is clear.
Yeah.
So for floating exchange rate, it simply means the country is moving from a planned system to a free market oriented system. And that's all about floating exchange rate. Thank you. So I hope I'm not going to have any reason to take again. So that's floating exchange rate system. Then the next one is developing the financial sector. The financial sector is crucial when it comes to the development of an economy, because without the financial sector, we don't even have a money system. It's the only way to which money can come in and go out of the economy. So I'm going to read further anyway. Poor developing countries have relatively weak financial sectors because the provision of banking services for low-income households and firms with small revenues is unlikely to be profitable and may be deemed too risky. Moreover, many of the borrowers in developing countries lack the necessary collateral to borrow from formal financial institutions. Financial sector, we're talking about the banking industry mostly. So the banking industry in developing countries are poorer developing countries, the banking system is weak. And because the banking system is weak, they cannot afford to give loans to customers that are considered high risk. They cannot afford to give loans to businesses that are considered high risk. And because of their inability to give out loans to businesses that are considered high risk or to customers that are considered high risk, it hinders economic growth and economic development. It hinders economic growth and economic development. Do you get the point I'm making here? So, what can be done? Now they said, moreover, many of the borrowers in developing countries lack the necessary collateral to borrow from formal financial institutions. So, what can they do? They come up with microfinance schemes. For microfinance schemes, we're talking about financial institutions that go towards the grassroots. Do you understand what I'm saying? They are financial institutions, but they go through the grassroots. So I'm going to read further. They said, microfinance schemes are one way of reaching out to low-income households. These are schemes started by NGOs, whereby very small loans are given out to individuals who would otherwise not have access to borrowed money in the formal sector. Interest rates are reasonable, and often lending is done within the context of a group like a village. Social pressure encourages people taking out loans to be responsible with how the money is spent and encourages repayment. Particular groups such as women who often have less access to finance than men may be targeted. Microfinance allows individuals to invest in businesses they already own or to start up new businesses. So for microfinance, we're simply talking about a scheme that is closer to the grassroots. And how are they efficient? They are efficient enough because of social pressure, number one, and they are attractive to low income households who have existing businesses to finance or who are thinking about starting up a business. So with microfinance schemes, accessibility to money becomes, it increases, which simply means a lot of individuals, a lot of smaller businesses who might not as well have access to finance, which allows them to start growing their businesses, which increases output, which would later increases development. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
However, microfinance schemes have been criticized for not helping the poor, with many women being forced to sell off essential items such as livestock and cooking pots to make their weekly repayments. Also, the finance offered can be too low to make a significant difference. Lenders are also reluctant to accept more risk, partly because the interest rates they charge can be capped through regulation. In recent years, there have been upward global trend in the use of digital banking. For example, Kenya's M-Pesa mobile payment system has grown since its launch in 2007 to about 70% of adults using it by 2017. In Asia, by 2017, one in four people were using online banking. So advances in technology within the financial sector, combined with greater access to the internet in developing countries, is helping to promote economic growth and development. So let's quickly go back to the disadvantage with the microfinance scheme. The microfinance scheme does not have ability to give so much capital. They don't give large amount of money to borrowers. Two, because whatever they do has been capped. They do not have true regulations. So it simply means they feel reluctant to give out loans. They cannot decide their interest rate. If they can as well decide their interest rate, it simply means it becomes profitable for them to give out loans, but they cannot decide. There's a cap, which simply means whatever they do is being monitored by regulatory bodies, especially the central bank. So this discourages them from giving out loans. And three, they do not give out loans to everybody. They have selected people that they give out loans to. So which simply means the microfinance scheme might not as well function the way it's supposed to function, which might not be able to lead to economic growth and development. But the good thing about the financial system is that with advancement in technology, the financial sector now have ability to to reach out to even people in the remote area. That means people even that don't have physical access to financial institutions like banks can do that with their phones. So that's mobile banking or online banking. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So financial sector is also crucial when it comes to measures to promote growth and development through the free market system. So we're done with the free market system. Now go to the interventionist strategies. Are you there?
Yeah.
So for the interventionist strategies, we're simply talking about the government strategies that are being used to manipulate or to increase economic growth and development. So the first one we're going to talk about is development of human capital. Are you there?
Yeah.
Education and skills have long been recognized as an important factor in economic development. Countries that invested heavily in education when they were still relatively poor, such as China and South Korea, have benefited in the long term. Education raises the human capital of the population and allows workers to be more productive. So, before I go further, one of the interventionist strategies that can be used is development of human capital. And for human capital to develop, it simply means we need education and training. Because education would improve your human capital, it will improve your skills, and you become more productive. There's much debate, however, about what sort of education is most important. Universal primary school education, for example, is almost certainly a higher priority than sending an extra 5% of secondary students to university. There are also issues concerning over-education. If, for example, university graduates cannot get graduate level jobs, that's underemployment, would the money spent on their education have been better spent on other development goals? In many look at the question here. The question is about questioning spending on education. If spending on education would lead to unemployment,
Underemployment.
both unemployment and underemployment.
Okay.
So if spending on education would lead to underemployment and unemployment, is it not better to spend on other strategic area than spending on education? That's the point there. So countries that have high rate of unemployment and still continue to spend on education, has these questions to answer. I think the point is clear there.
Yeah.
In many developing countries, a large proportion of children now complete primary school education. However, the quality of education can be very different between countries. Poor rural and remote areas can also suffer disproportionately. Strategies for development are therefore likely to focus on methods to improve quality. Some of these may arise from government failure. For example, as reported by the World Bank, teachers posted to Indonesia's poor and remote areas were given an unconditional special allowance. This seemed to cause a higher rate of teacher absence compared with teachers who did not receive the allowance. New laws have now been passed to link these allowance with teacher performance. This may help to improve the quality of education for children in these areas. So it's not all about the numbers of children that go to school.
It's quality.
It's the quality of
Education.
education they receive. And the quality of education they receive comes from the teachers. So if government does not put in place the right strategy that would encourage teachers to put in their best, the money spent on education would not be fruitful. And that is the point they're making. So government have to come up with ways in which the quality of teachers will determine the quality of teachers will determine how the money spent on education would be. So if teachers should not just get teachers should not just get benefits because they want to encourage them to be in specific area. They should get those benefits because they are qualified to get it, and it should be based on performance. So most of the time they could use what we call performance PRP, performance related payments, PRP, for teachers so that they can be, they can be productive. I think the point is clear about education, development of human capital through education. So another interventionist strategy that can be used is protectionism. For protectionism, we're simply at times, countries might believe that their own development could best be promoted through a policy of import substitution. So the deliberate attempt to replace imported goods with domestically produced goods by adopting protectionist measures. So for import substitution, it simply means instead of us to continue to import this pen from abroad, we can as well produce this pen here. That is import substitution. And for that to happen, it simply means there's trade restriction. And for trade restriction, it means protectionism. Do you get the point here? Mm-hmm. So in 2018, protectionism was more widely used by some countries as a means of promoting economic growth and development. Examples include the USA introduced steel tariffs as a means of protecting its steel industry. The likely objective was to protect US jobs and so, at least in the short run, promote economic growth. So government comes up with protectionist policies because they want to protect their own industry. And promoting their industry simply means they want to encourage production in their own country. And one way to do that is to introduce tariffs, according to what is being said here. Yeah. So, in January 2018, the Indian government announced that it planned to introduce 70% tariffs on solar panels imported from several countries, but mostly directed at China. India's panel makers would benefit from these tariffs. The objective was to promote domestic manufacturing in India as part of the Make in India scheme, which is by promoting industrialization. So is still about import substitution. So the Indian government introduced 70% tariffs on imported solar panels. Why are they doing that? They are doing that because they want to encourage their own industries
And
to
protect
continue
them.
and protect them to continue to produce. So locals should rather buy domestically made solar panels
Which
than
are
imported
cheaper.
one, which are considered cheaper, yes. Because they will be considered cheaper now based on the fact that
Tariff.
tariffs has, increased the price of imported solar panels.
Wait,
And
but
that yes,
who pays the tariffs? Is it the exporter?
importers.
Oh, okay. So
So those importing firms that rely on imported China solar panels to sell in the domestic market
they
will
pay
have to pay, yeah, they
70%.
pay 7% on tariffs.
But
So
the Chinese companies only get the original price, right?
the Chinese companies,
Yeah, like when they buy goods, the 70% goes to the government, not to the Chinese companies, right?
no, it's tariff, so
Yeah,
it's
it goes to the government.
government. But do you know why it is like that? It is assumed, it is known that the Chinese government would always subsidize for its industries.
This makes it very cheap.
So it is cheaper buying imported products. But now it becomes expensive because of the tariffs. To buy it with free trade, it is cheaper. But with protectionism, it becomes expensive.
Okay.
But when this happens, China might also retaliate, making 70% on imported goods from India. Do you understand? So there's always going to be retaliation in that situation.
Price war.
Price war is not price war. Price war comes in the oligopolistic competition. But here we're talking about the global market. So it's not price war, it's retaliation. Are you with me? Okay. So countries wishing to diversify away from exporting commodities can give short-term selective assistance to the manufacturing industries. The objective is to provide protection while these industries are infant industries. The newly industrialized nations of Brazil and Mexico, and particularly the economies of Hong Kong, South Korea, and Singapore, have enjoyed above average growth. By adopting such a strategy, import substitution policies might create jobs in the short run as domestic production replaces foreign production. However, criticism include one, long-run output and growth of output will be lower than they would otherwise have been because import substitution denies the country the benefit to be gained from specialization. The first problem I would need that for import substitution, please. Here. For import substitution, it simply means we are replacing imported made goods with domestic made products. For example, this is a pen, replacing this pen is an imported pen, but instead of us continuing to import this pen, we would produce pens here in Libya. That is import substitution. The advantage about import substitution is that it encourages industrialization and it encourages domestic consumption, which will as well increase economic growth and economic development. But what are the consequences of import substitution? The first one is that in the long run, output and growth are expected to be lower. And why? They are lower because import substitution simply means you don't have access to produce what you are good at producing. With import substitution, it simply means you rely on whatever you have for production. So that means there's no specialization. And it is only with specialization that you can increase output in the long run. Do you understand? Because when it comes to import substitution, the first thing that comes to your mind is, do you have a comparative advantage towards it? If you don't have comparative advantage, so it simply means you are squeezing yourself to make the production. And that is misallocation. Two, protectionism leads to dynamic inefficiency. And how does it lead to dynamic inefficiency? It leads to dynamic inefficiency because you have to continuously put so much in technology that you don't need. Because you don't have comparative advantage over it, and you continue to waste resources because you want to get what you are not supposed to get. The third one, okay, yeah, they said protected domestic producers have no incentive to reduce cost or improve products because there's a lack of foreign competition. Countries which have adopted import substitution strategies have tended to experience lower growth rates than other countries, particularly if they are small countries. The larger the country, the more opportunities there are for specialization within the country. So it's still talking about dynamic inefficiency. You won't have any reason to find a way to reduce your cost because whatever cost you incur, it has to be paid by the domestic or by the consumer, the local consumers. And that does not allow you to increase your efficiency. The third one, a low value exchange rate increases prices competitiveness. A low value exchange rate increases price competitiveness in foreign markets and leads to export-led growth. But wait, I want to check something here. No, that's exchange rate anyway. So that's about import substitution. Any question about import substitution?
No.
Good. So go to manage exchange rate. Are you there?
Mhm.
For a managed exchange rate is an interventionist strategy. Government can choose to manage a single exchange rate, buying and selling currency to fix an exchange rate. A high value exchange rate reduces the cost of imports. This is beneficial for growth if it encourages more imports of capital goods. So the fixed exchange rate, the government wants to manage it. If government is managing, it means government is trying to find a fixed exchange rate. So if government of a country feels that it needs to import capital goods, and to import capital goods, it simply means you have to increase your exchange rate to make imported goods to become cheaper. So if the goal is to import capital goods for investment, then increasing the exchange rate will become beneficial to the economy because capital goods becomes cheaper to buy. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
A low value exchange rate increases price competitiveness in foreign markets and leads to export-led growth. On the other hand, if the country wants to achieve an export-led growth, it can as well devalue the currency. Devaluing the currency simply means the foreigners find it cheaper to buy from the country, and that would increase the value and the volume of exports within that country, and that is export-led growth. Do you get it?
Mhm.
However, speculation in currency market is so large that countries find it very difficult to maintain an exchange rate even within a broad band over a number of years. There's always speculation. Speculation brings about pessimistic feeling. One of the most interventionist type, so one of the most interventionist type of policy is to fix a number of different exchange rates. For example, there might be a high exchange rate for imports of essential products, a lower rate of imports for other goods, and an even lower rate of exports. Foreign currency is managed through the central bank, which controls how much foreign currency will be available, for example, for imports of essential goods and imports for all other goods. So, because of speculation, another way to go around speculation is to find exchange rate for different situations. For essential goods, this is going to be the exchange rate. For luxury goods, this is going to be what the exchange rate will be. If this can occur, it makes it easier to determine or to decide on on the prices of exports price of exports and imports within the economy. So a high exchange rate for imports of essential. Now let's look at the consequence of setting different rates of exchange on different goods. A high exchange rate for imports of essential products means that the domestic price of these goods is low. This helps reduce poverty if they are essential consumer goods. It encourages investment if they are investment goods. So a high exchange rate for imports of essential products means that the domestic price becomes cheaper. So if the exchange rate is high, government wants to discourage people from buying imported goods. And that it simply means government has made domestic goods affordable. And because it is becoming affordable, domestic producers will be encouraged to produce more because the demand for their goods will increase. Do you understand the first point there?
Yeah.
A lower exchange rate for other imports means that the domestic price of these goods is higher, discouraging their imports. So less class foreign exchange is likely to be used for non-essential imports than if exchange rate was free floating. So for non-essential, so it's simply luxury. So it depends on your own availability, your own income. So it does not affect government because government will be able to make revenue through tariffs on this. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So another advantage of fixing exchange rate in this way is that there is exchange rate stability. Exporters and importers can plan for the future. Like I said earlier, if government makes plan on different exchange rate for different goods, it simply means there won't be speculation and people can plan. Importers can plan, exporters can as well plan.
Mhm.
In practice, third exchange rates rarely work in the way intended. Black markets in foreign exchange always develop, which can destabilize the system. Governments do not necessarily fix the right exchange rates to achieve their policy objectives. The greatest problem is corruption. Tired exchange rates are an open invitation for government officials and politicians to get hold of allocation of currency at one exchange rate and sell it at a profit at another exchange rate. Corruption is a significant factor holding back economic development in many countries. Now, government officials, because they decide the policy, they decide what the exchange rate would be. They might use it to their own advantage. They buy at a cheaper rate and sell to people at an expensive, at a rate that is way expensive. And who are those people that they're going to sell? So because government takes charge of the exchange rate, the foreign currency would not be available in the banks. They would rather sell it to few people in the black market or in the parallel market to buy. So which means it becomes scarce in the financial institutions. And because they are scarce in the financial institutions, individual households would have to go through the parallel market to buy. And that increases the price that they have to buy. Because those that buy through the black market that buys from the financial institutions are buying at a rate that is higher than the fixed rate. And if they have to sell, they have to sell at a way higher than the price they bought it.
So basically what's happening in Libya.
Yes. So I think so, because there's a fixed exchange rate. But when you go to
Which is the price that the bank says.
But it's not really going to be available. You can't find the dollars in the bank.
Which is 6.35.
6.35. But it's not going to be available in the bank, which simply means you are at the mercy of the black market if you need the dollar. So because you are at the mercy of the black market because you need the dollar, you have to buy at whatever price they have to sell.
Which is 10.
Which is 10. So which simply means the demand for it is inelastic. But you get it? So what brings about this? Corruption. So that's why they said corruption is a significant factor holding back economic development in many countries. So whenever there's corruption, certain individuals are better off. Majority become worse off. And because majority carries the vote, it affects the economy as a whole. So if for every 1 in 10 people, for every 1 in 100 people has access to foreign exchange, it simply means 99 people do not have the same access. And that makes 99 people to be vulnerable. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So a fixed exchange rate has its own benefits and it also have its own setbacks. But mostly its setback comes because government does not have an institution that is well structured. The institution, this happens with developing countries anyway. You wouldn't see the exchange rate of European countries fluctuating this way. It's stable, it's fixed. But developing countries, it's not stable. And it's mostly because of corruption. I think it's clear.
Mhm.
Another method that can be used when it comes to interventionist strategies for economic growth and development is infrastructure development. Infrastructure is essential for economic development. For example, a coastal country needs well-functioning ports if it is to export and import efficiently. A landlocked country needs good roads, railways, and airports for trade and the movement of people. Schools and hospitals need to be built. A government may also choose to spend more money on infrastructure as a means of achieving faster economic growth. For example, Chinese economic planners have turned more heavily to infrastructure as a stimulus since 2015 compared to further investment in manufacturing. In China, injecting more investment in manufacturing as part of a post-2008 stimulus caused overcapacity in many industries. So further investment spending is being channeled into roads, railways, and water projects. China's commitment to infrastructure spending, both in terms of funding and getting projects finished, is often viewed as a significant reason why its economic growth has far outpaced India's over the past few decades. By 2018, China was already halfway through a three-decade, $300 billion expansion of its motorway system, which will connect all Chinese cities with a population of more than 200,000 people. In contrast, India's road project can be delayed due to legal challenges, funding shortfalls, and inability to acquire land. Look at this system. China continues its infrastructure program and is halfway through. India, on the other hand, is unable to continue. It's even pending them. It has not even executed them because it's unable to secure land because most of the land has been sold. So, the ability of a country to come up with a system that encourages infrastructure will determine how fast-paced the economic growth and development will be. One interventionist approach to infrastructure development is for government to be the main builder of infrastructure. In a country like Spain, for example, the government is responsible for building and maintaining roads, schools, and hospitals. A more free market approach is for government to allow private sector companies to develop infrastructure, sometimes through private financing initiatives. For example, many seaports and airports around the world are owned by private sector companies. The private sector can also build and operate hospitals and schools. Who should provide infrastructure depends on a number of factors. One is profitability. The private sector will only build and operate infrastructure if it is profitable. Another factor is efficiency. Free market economists argue that the private sector is more efficient in general than the public sector. For example, the total cost of building a new container port is likely to be lower if it is owned, built, and operated by a private sector company than by government. A third factor is availability of resources. A government may not have the resources from its budget to build. For example, a new port going ahead with the project may mean the government builds up too much public sector debt. Allowing the private sector to fund the development may allow the project to go ahead. So for infrastructure, there are three things that have been mentioned there: profitability, efficiency, and availability of resources. So if infrastructure is being built by the private sector will do it better because the private sector is profit-oriented. It simply means the cost the private sector is going to spend, the cost of building infrastructure through the private sector will be lower compared to the cost of building infrastructure with the public sector. That's the point about the private sector. And this occurs because the private sector wants to make profit. And to make profit, there's inverse relationship between profit and cost. You have to lower your cost. The public sector will not think about that. That is profitability. Then we have efficiency. The private sector are economists, they are technocrats, they are business people. They want to use resources. They wouldn't want to waste resources. On the other hand, the public sector might have square peg in round holes. They might have been appointed because they might have political appointments. And because they have political appointment, it might as well be like unqualified people mounting or taking a position that they don't know about. So which simply means putting a doctor in infrastructure like education to spearhead educational infrastructure might not be good. So which simply means there will be waste of resources. That is efficiency. The private sector would not do that. The private sector would not employ a doctor for infrastructure to build schools. It would not, no matter how close the doctor is. They would rather employ the person they don't know who is an engineer to mount it, to spearhead it. That is efficiency and resource allocation. The private sector has enough resources. The public sector might have to spend from the budget. And spending from the budget, if the budget is not enough, the public sector might as well borrow to finance these projects. And borrowing to finance a project simply means your national debt is increasing. So these are three reasons why infrastructure should be left in the hands of the private sector: the profit orientation, efficiency, and resource allocation.
Okay.
I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So some large infrastructure projects in a number of developing countries have not given the benefits intended. They may have been poorly built and poorly maintained. In the case of dams, they have been criticized for creating large-scale environmental damage, as well as displacing large numbers of people from their lands. Although critics argue that freeing up available land allows the project to go ahead quickly so that long delays are not experienced. Infrastructure projects are also often associated with bribery and corruption. Everything is going to come back to bribery and corruption. So how does bribery and corruption comes in when it comes to infrastructure? They want to give projects. They want to give projects to. Yes, please.
Hello, Mr.
Hi, sir.
How are you?
I'm good, sir.
Today, last day?
Yeah, the last lesson, yes. So promoting joint ventures with multinationals. So foreign direct investment can be associated with exploitation, where foreign companies take far more from their investment than the country receives in benefits. One way of reducing perceived exploitation is for a government to insist on major investment being set up as a joint venture. So for interventionist policy, developing countries are taking this step also. So before a multinational set up in your country, the first thing you tell them is,
So, huh?
I'm using it. So multinationals, developing countries now, what they do is when multinationals come in, they don't just allow you to just set up in their country because you're going to exploit them. They would rather want you to have a joint venture. So that means you're gonna have a combined project with an existing firm in their country, and that is the point they're making here. So, for example, the government of a developing country, I said earlier, the government of a developing country may allow a US car vehicle manufacturer to establish a car plant in its country. However, it may insist that US manufacturers find a local partner to create a jointly owned company for the car plant. Ownership may be 50-50, with the US company owning half the company. By doing this, the government ensures that only half of the profit of the car plant will go back to the US. At first, the local partner is likely to provide finance rather than knowledge. However, once the car plant is established, there will inevitably be a transfer of knowledge to the local partner. This knowledge may be used to develop other activities shared more widely in the local business community and among local workers. In recent times, some critics have expressed concern that developed countries may actually lose out when they invest in developing countries. For example, Donald Trump, the president of the US, thinks joint ventures are often simply a way of developing countries to make quick gains at the expense of developed countries by stealing their technology. So, the criticism about joint venture is this: if there's joint venture, a developed country is coming, a firm from America is coming to Libya to set up a business. The government of Libya would not allow this business to set up unless it has a Libyan company partner. So which simply means the government of Libya might as well fund the Libyan company in terms of finance. Then they're going to put the same amount of money into the business. It becomes a joint venture, 50-50. In the long run, the company will take over, taking out the other partner from abroad of the radar. And that is what Trump is talking about here. So the criticism about having a joint venture is that it puts the developed countries in a worse situation because whatever happens, the owner of the land is the owner of the property. Do you understand? So because anything on land is land. So you might want to take, the only thing you can take is the capital, the cash you have. The technology, the equipment, you might not be able to take them again. So which simply means developing countries will have access to all this equipment, access to all this technology at the detriment of the foreign direct investment or the multinationals. So one of the reasons why it might be difficult for a country or developing countries to attract multinationals is because of the sunk cost. Does it make sense to you? So that's another interventionist policy. Then the next one we have is the buffer stock schemes. The price of commodities is volatile over time. So this is a problem for developing countries that rely upon commodities for export jobs, and government income. One way of stabilizing commodity prices is to set a buffer stock scheme. So government will buy when it is cheap and sell when it's expensive. So this is likely to be set up by a group of governments to fix world prices for a commodity. Equally, it could operate within a country, assuming that exports and imports are controlled. A buffer stock scheme that works effectively over a long period of time has a number of possible advantages. Please, I need buffer stock scheme, please. I need the video. Thank you. I think that's where we end our lesson for today. So for buffer stock, it's a way in which government would try to, to balance prices of commodity. So here they said a buffer stock scheme. Okay, this is likely to be set up by a group of government to fix world prices for a commodity. Equally, it could operate within a country, assuming that exports and imports are controlled. A buffer stock scheme that works effectively over a long period of time has a number of possible advantages. So, what are the advantages of a buffer stock scheme? Number one, by stabilizing prices, it encourages firms in the industry to invest. If it is an agricultural commodity such as rice, it gives farmers an incentive to plan for the long term. So with buffer stock, it simply means the government of that country is buying raw commodity when they are so cheap and making it available to those who need them in the future when it becomes expensive and volatile for them to buy. So this encourages, they said, by stabilizing prices, encourages firms in industry to invest. So firms will not be discouraged to spend on other aspects that they need to spend on, because they know as soon as prices increases, there's always government there for them to go buy from. Two, it prevents sharp falls in price. If it is an agricultural commodity, it could prevent the poorest farmers sinking into absolute poverty. How does it prevent a sharp fall in price? It prevents a sharp fall in price because if the commodities are, the supply are increasing, government buy the excess. So instead of the excess to just be in the market to be sold at a reduced price by the farmers, the government will buy them and keep them for the future time when the price will rise.
Okay.
So government serves as a last resort for farmers. Do you understand? The supply is excess. There's excess in the market. So the excess is what the government will buy, and that is what the buffer is about. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that makes farmers not to move towards absolute poverty. The third one, consumers will also benefit from less price volatility. Buffer stock scheme combine elements of both minimum and maximum prices. Typically, a price is set for the commodity. If the free market price threatens to go below the minimum price, then the buffer stock scheme will buy the commodity. This increases demand and raises price. The buffer stock scheme may also set a maximum price where it will sell the commodity. This increases supply, reducing price. So the buffer stock is a physical stock of the commodity held in warehouses. When the free market price is below the minimum price, stock will rise as the scheme buys in the market. When the free market price is above the maximum price, stock will fall as the scheme sells in the market. So for the scheme to work effectively over time, stock must rise and fall. If they only rise, the scheme will run out of money to carry on buying. If they only fall, eventually there would be no stock left to sell to reduce prices. So for buffer stock, it's simply about the fluctuation about the price of commodity. If the price is above the maximum price, if the price is above what the equilibrium price should be, the government will make it available for them to sell. If the price is below the equilibrium price, the government will buy from the free market for keep. So when price increases, they sell. When price falls, they buy. So without falling and without price increasing or decreasing, the buffer stock scheme would never work. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So price above the equilibrium price, they sell. Price below the equilibrium price, they buy. And that is what buffer stock scheme is all about. Any question about it?
No.
So on this note, we end today's lesson. So in the next class, we're going to talk about the impact of other strategies. So we're done with interventionist strategies and pre-market strategies. Let me see. Have this. So the time.